if it'll work. Okay, there we go. Really, this is the follow up to World War One and how people question democracy following World War One. Democracy had been the government for a lot of countries, and yet we see something we've never seen before in World War One. And so, in the aftermath of this, you'll see a lot of countries turn away from democracy. You'll see a turn towards socialism. That capitalism kind of had a role to play in the imperialism and the scramble for Africa and all that stuff. So, in America, you get something called the Lost Generation, with people like Gertrude Stein and many of our famous writers of that time period. They're disillusioned with the materialism of American society, and a lot of them are going to pick up and they're going to move to war-ravaged Europe, where they feel like there's a better culture going on. There is generally pessimism over the idea of human progress, going back to really the Renaissance era, when we start moving towards humanism and all that. Most people felt like the world was moving to a better place and that life was going to be better for their children than it was for them. And World War One's really kind of the first time that people questioned that idea that the future might actually be a better place. We'd never murdered each other and massacred each other on such a huge scale as what we did in the Great War. Again, as you can see there, the questioning of democracy. You have people like Friedrich Nietzsche, who's discrediting religion. He's a philosopher. What role does God play in life and stuff like that? People are questioning everything. Would God really let 20 million human beings be killed? You also get another movement, existentialism, which basically is that humans are free will, and that God's not in it as much, that you have the will to have your own moral compass, to be a good person, to be a bad person. Again, people are just trying to make sense of a world that they felt like had gone crazy. Albert Einstein, we're all familiar with Albert Einstein here in America. He comes over to us. He's a Jew that emigrates from Germany into America, and he throws the scientific community on its head. Since Isaac Newton, we'd had the idea that the universe ran by rules, and that gave us some comfort because, well, there's rules, and if you know the rules, you can follow the rules, and you can have expectations. But Albert Einstein's theory of special relativity basically says neither time nor space or have absolute values, and that they vary with the observer, that time isn't constant, that time moves differently for some people than others. If you're going beyond the speed of light, then time moves differently for you. He theorized that in a black hole and the event horizon, that an observer there, the person caught in the hole would seem to be caught forever from the outside observer, but from the person inside the hole, time would be moving much quicker. So it gets pretty crazy, but the big key out of Einstein is that his know the words theory of special relativity, and know that it brings uncertainty to the scientific community. And again, people are just questioning things, and you see that with the uncertainty principle underneath. These concepts extended to humanities and social scientists. Science, they're questioning God, they're questioning democracy, they're questioning everything, because we kind of surprised ourselves with the Great War. We didn't know we could be that bad. Sigmund Freud, he's the father of psychology, and he's going to be the guy that basically gets people on the couch and makes the science of analyzing the brain, the thoughts, the mind, stuff like that. He had id, super id, and ego were his three main things. He felt that people repressed sexual desires and that they had inner fears. Basically, that a lot of your actions you can't control because it's your subconscious controlling you. Again, it fits into that uncertainty theme that you'll see following World War One. People are trying to interpret dreams and what do they mean. It's just everybody's trying to figure out what makes a human, and why did we do the things that we did in the Great War in World War One. Art goes through some big changes as well. Photography has come so far that it almost makes realism in painting irrelevant, because as good as a painter as you are, it's not going to be as good as a photograph. So you see art turn away from realism and turn to surrealism and abstract art. Um, and art becomes something that's a creation from the artist's mind. Not all, think about all the paintings you've seen up to this point in history of rulers and stuff. They're sitting down, they're posing for it. Um, so art is changing drastically in this time period. One of the artists you need to know is Pablo Picasso, the father of Cubism, which is abstract type art. You've seen some of his stuff. We'll look at some pictures of it in class. Uh, and you get this influence of non-Western style. So it isn't going to look like Greek and Roman art anymore. We got this new movement. You also get a mechanization of architecture. Architecture is not going to, it's going to be more workmanlike and less beautiful. You get the Bauhaus, these German um, buildings where form is more, the form follows function, that the functionality of it, they don't have to be pretty, square, lifeless, but they're efficient. That's the main purpose of it, that a building isn't supposed to be a work of art. Skyscrapers, these giant glass boxes, the early skyscrapers, nothing fancy about them. And it's adopted everywhere. Skyscrapers are kind of an American thing that spreads out to other industrialized countries. This international style is loved by businesses and government. It's efficient. It doesn't have to be pretty. Now, another big theme of this chapter is moving into the Great Depression and the rise of the dictators that will lead us into World War II. So here's the European origins of the Great Depression. When we think of the Great Depression, we think of it starting in America, but there's a lot more factors that play into this. Austria and Germany have to borrow money from the United States after World War I to pay their war debts to France and England. Remember, they are hit with the war guilt clause. So they've got to pay back $33 billion in reparation money, and they have no factories. Their colonies have been taken away from them. So how are they going to pay that back? Well, France and England are taking the money from Austria and Germany that they're paying them to pay their money that they owe United States for World War I. Remember, a big reason that America got into the war was because we had loaned a lot of money to France and England, and we were afraid they were going to lose and they wouldn't be able to pay us back. So America is sitting here, and they're the center of everything. This system is dependent on a flow of cash from the United States of America. But we see investment begin to pull out of America in 1928, which is right before the fall, the stock market crash in 1929. So there's some connections here. So Europe's garbage over there has got America involved. Also, technology is doing some things as well. Single export countries were devastated by declines due to new technology. So if the only thing your country really made money off of was, say, coffee or bananas or something like that, if you didn't have a diverse economy, this was a rough time for you. Reclaimed rubber destroys rubber-based economies of the Dutch East Indies, Malaysia, and Ceylon. They take rubber and basically do a redo, recycling the rubber and stuff, and so that hurt those countries. Another big cause for the Great Depression was agricultural surpluses. During World War One, Europe wasn't producing food; they were fighting. Everybody's fighting, and so they were buying their food from America, and which is great for American farmers. The war was great for American farmers, but in the 1920s, the Europeans start farming again, and so now you have too much food being produced, which drives down, when you have a huge supply of things, it drives down the price. And you had these enormously strong harvests in 25 and 1929. Wheat actually hits its lowest price in 400 years. Could you imagine anything right now costing less than it did 400 years ago? I mean, it's crazy. Farm income drops. And remember that farmers usually are borrowing money from banks for their tractors and stuff. So it's going to be hard for them to pay back the banks. And then it's going to get the banks in trouble as well, because the banks are going to lose out on money that's not being paid back to them. Yes, they can repossess farms, but they can only recoup so much of their money. Then, to make matters worse, in the mid to late 30s, the Dust Bowl strikes in America. Basically, Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, and a little bit of Colorado and Utah, but the West out there. And it's this huge ecological disaster. The topsoil, they're not able to farm anymore, and the wind's going to pick up this topsoil and blow it, as far east is New York. I mean, some of these storms were 1,500 miles wide. You had cows suffocating and stuff. It led to a lot of migrations. A lot of people, a lot of Okies got in their jalopies and they moved west to California to for better days. So the Dust Bowl right smack dab in the middle of the Great Depression makes things worse. Now, the Great Depression begins semi-officially on Black Thursday, October 24th, 1929. People, and a lot, because in America, things seem so good on the surface, and people are investing in stock markets to make quick money, and they're purchasing stocks on margin, basically meaning that they're borrowing money to invest in the stock market. And there's a lot of speculation going on. There are, people are borrowing money but investing unwisely. And when the stock market crashes, people lose their life savings, absolute life savings. Hints of a slowdown in Europe, so investors begin to sell off. You get a snowball effect. Like I said, life savings become lost. Black Thursday hits, people lose everything. You even had 11 suicides from people who lost everything and just decided that they couldn't start over. All right. U.S. economic collapse. Inventory surplus led to layoffs. Again, we've produced so much stuff, we don't need more workers. We got enough in the warehouse to sell for several years, so why pay somebody to make more? Too much surplus. So layoffs lead to decreased demand and businesses fell. And all this is complicated and attached it to each other. In 1932, the industrial production was half of what it was in 1929, and 44% of United States banks were out of business. Thousands of banks went out of business. And when that happened in this time period, when your bank went out of business, your money was gone. It disappeared, and you didn't get it back. Now, hardest hit countries in the world, because this isn't going to be just in America. It's going to be connected, because here's the thing. When America goes into the Great Depression, and they, it was really, that system was that America was really paying itself back with its own money. So America, was loaning Germany and Austria-Hungary money to pay the British and the French the reparations, and the British and the French were turning around and giving that money back to America. So really, America was paying itself back for those loans to Britain and France. So, but now everything's really crazy. So the hardest hit countries dependent on export and manufactured goods for essentials, such as Japan. So Japan's going to be hard hit. With this. Single export countries like those in South America were also hard hit. You did have government attempts to increase demand to help for prices. In Brazil, the surplus of coffee beans were set on fire, and they would just use them to build their highways with them. In America, they had something similar to this, where they're trying to get farmers to dump their milk and stuff, and kill some of their animals, so that supply and demand are in a good balance there. You get a famous book from this time period, The Grapes of Wrath, that talks about the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression in general, by John Steinbeck. There are several novels about the Great Depression, as you can imagine, though. America is trying lots of things. Laissez-faire, hands off. The idea that the businesses will fix themselves, because that's smart, but that doesn't get America out of the Great Depression. They get planned scarcity. Again, trying to convince, they're paying farmers not to farm. That doesn't work. You get John Maynard Keynes, whose Keynesian economics is something that we adopt. He says you got to stimulate the economy by lowering interest rates so you can get investment from businesses. And, they'll employ more people because they're making a better profit. He's a believer in spending more than you have, actually deficit spending, to get us out of the Great Depression. You get an American president, the only president who ever served more than 2 terms, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, becomes president in he's elected in 32 and begins serving in 33. He puts forth his idea called the New Deal. And the New Deal has all these alphabet soups of businesses, government, industries that will, give jobs. The CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, going to have a bunch of young boys out there planting trees, and they'll send 80% of their income back home to their families to help support them. He tries a lot of things, But understand that none of that works. None of that pulls America out of the Great Depression. It's not until World War II and the military spending that goes along with it do we get out of the Great Depression. And there's a picture of FDR, the man in the middle there. All right, so now we switch gears and we're going over to Russia. Russia's got all kinds of problems. Remember that Russia pulled out of World War I in 1917, about a year before its conclusion. They kill, the Bolsheviks kill um, Tsar Nicholas II and his entire family. So the Romanov dynasty has come to an end. And these Bolsheviks, these Soviets, take over. And they disband the assembly, and their motto, all power to the Soviets. The Soviets are socialists, so they're wanting to get rid of classes. They're wanting to get rid of capitalism. From the years 1918 to 1922 in the Soviet Union, well, it's still Russia technically, what you see is rapid collectivization. There are leaders under Vladimir Lenin, who is the guy running the show. He is going to have big farms. He's going to confiscate land, a lot of land. And his big policy was land, peace, and bread. And he's given that to some people. But some of the stuff is really unpopular. And so Lenin walks it back a little bit. And he pushes for something you need to know called his new economic policy, which was partial capitalism, partial privatization of the economy to help get Russia on its feet, because socialism right out of the gate like that just was not working. In the new economic policy, there was a promotion of agriculture and industry. So the Soviet flag, the red flag with the famous yellow sickle and hammer, the hammer represents industry and the sickle on it represents agriculture. The kulaks are an affluent peasant group, meaning that they're basically farmers that have a little bit of money, have a little bit of education, and they are not. They are seen sort of as enemies for the Soviets, and they want to take land from them, basically. And is one step backwards, two steps forward. Just that we got to take a little bit from you guys so that we can advance in the future. Lenin's going to end up having a stroke, though, in 1922. So he's worthless for 2 years there until his death in 1924. In his wake, there's a triumvirate of power. Joseph Stalin, who you should be familiar with, Bukharin, and Leon Trotsky. Leon Trotsky was the leader of the Russian Red Army, the Communist Army, in the Russian Civil War. So the Russian Civil War that follows immediately after Russia leaves World War I is going to kill like 14 million Russians. It's insane. So the Russians are going to lose 7 million in World War I, and then turn around and lose an additional 14 million Russians. It's staggering, really. Now, out of those three, Joseph Stalin is going to emerge as the victor. He is going to remove the others from power. Leon Trotsky actually will flee to Mexico. He will eventually be tracked down by some of Stalin's goons and assassinated. Joseph Stalin's actual name is this first line that you can see there. Yosef Vissarionovich Duskaveli. I can't say his last name. He changes that name to Joseph Stalin, Stalin meaning man of steel. He was from a Russian province called Georgia. And his mother's influence led to an Orthodox seminary education. So basically, he was initially trying, basically be an Orthodox priest. But by 1928, he is the unquestioned solo ruler of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union becomes a thing in 1922 and will be a thing until 1991. All right, so Stalin his big idea is to hammer out industrialization, and his program's called the Great Leap Forward. And he wants that entire country completely socialist. He wants massive collectivization of agriculture. You got farms of 50,000 people, so it's one farm, and you might have 25,000 to 50,000 people living on that farm, working for the government. No private ownership or anything like that. You get the Ukrainian famine. 1932 to 33. Ukrainians a different ethnic group, and he's trying to get rid of the kulaks. He doesn't like the kulaks, and he says, when you cut down a forest, splinters will fly. He's going to kill millions and millions and millions of people. He'll kill more people than Hitler. He has something called the Great Purges. He turns on the Communist Party when he comes to power. And, he's going to kill between 8 and 14 million Russians in his purges. So put that on top of the Russian Civil War and World War One, and Russia's just losing just massive amounts of people. He's got 8 million Soviet citizens in labor camps by 1939. And these people that he will call, remember that totalitarian states need enemies of the state. These wreckers, these saboteurs, he'll blame the Jews, and he'll blame the kulaks and these other groups. The Gulag was a place that they would, basically these prisons that they would send them to. Internal exile, like they'd send you to Siberia because nobody wants to be in Siberia. It's very cold, tundra like over there. Forced labor, rough living conditions. People are being tried and then retried. They're going to make sure that he is Big Brother. Joseph Stalin is Big Brother, and he is all powerful. We're going to go into much more detail in class on Stalin. All right. Now, likewise, so Stalin is coming to power in Russia, but there are some other European nations that are, that they are going against democracy as well. In Italy, we will get under Benito Mussolini, a name you must know, the origin of something called fascism. And, fascism is different than socialism. It's going to end with the dictatorship, just like socialism does. But fascism allies itself with the upper middle class and the elites, the business owners. And it's about extreme nationalism. That's what fascism is. Well, here you go. Here's some common elements. The state is more important than the individual. If we need to take your rights away, that's fine, because it's more important that Italy is strong, or that Germany is strong. There's a distrust of democracy in fascism. Hostility to communists. Fascists hate communists. It's chauvinistic, meaning that it's male-dominated, and it's militaristic. You got a lot of people in fascist countries that dress up in uniforms that aren't even soldiers. They're party members, but they want to look like they're part of the military. All right. Again, part of the rise of fascism happens because things didn't go well for Italy following World War One. The public was upset that Italy, who was on the Allied side, didn't get any territorial gains out of it. They are also thrust into social and economic turmoil. And Mussolini starts off life as basically a newspaper editor, and he uses it to gain a large following of people to support his ideas. And him and his black shirts march on Rome in October and force King Emmanuel III basically to name him prime minister. The people are like, you're going to appoint him legally, or we're going to pull you from power and we're going to appoint him. And the king says, no. He sounds like a good prime minister. That's fine. But by 1926, Mussolini's not listening to anybody else. He seizes all power as Il Duce, meaning the leader. And that's part of fascism. You got to have a strong central figure who runs the show. Nearby, you get a guy you're certainly familiar with, Adolf Hitler, who's going to be influenced by Mussolini's fascism in Italy. In 1921, he became chairman of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And there is some confusion here. There are people these days who are trying to say that Hitler was a socialist and not a fascist. That is not correct. He was basically a spy working in this socialist party. And when he comes to power, he's going to turn away from all that. He's going to turn to fascism. He's not going to seek a classless state. Hitler is allying himself with the rich in Germany, the business owners and the bankers and stuff like that. But before he became the Hitler that he tried to overthrow the government in 1923. He was unsuccessful, and he was sent to jail, but he only spent like 9 months in jail and got out for good behavior. While he was in jail, he wrote his autobiography called Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. And it becomes really popular with the people. Hitler's all about rhetoric. He hates the Treaty of Versailles, and he blames the Jews for the reason Germans lost. The only reason they lost because the Jews hurt them from the inside. He says all these basically uses scapegoats and gives all these excuses, and he has these grand plans and grand ambitions that Germans who are really struggling, especially once the Great Depression hits in Germany, um, they want to listen to this guy because he's got ideas. It seems like. So he capitalizes on public discontent with post-war era. The war guilt clause, he hypes it up. Reparation payments, he says we're not going to pay those. And the inability of the other major parties to come to a consensus on anything. They can't agree on anything. So Hitler just says, here's the rules. We're going to solve the issues. He's very anti-Semitic. He's very anti-Jew. We know that the Holocaust is coming, and that's going to be done under his direction. We'll talk about that in the next chapter. The Nazis become the single largest party in the German parliament between 1930 and 1932. The Germans have a democracy, the Weimar Republic, but they have a weak president. Paul von Hindenburg is a little nervous about Hitler, and he feels the pressure from Hitler's supporters, and so he appoints him as chancellor in 1933, which is a mistake. Again, Hitler is going to end up taking all the power. He suppresses opposition. He takes away constitutional and civil rights. He makes the Nazis the sole legal party of Germany. He destroys the trade unions. All right, he's not going to let workers, fight for rights. That's why the business owners like him. The business owners don't like unions because that weakens their power. He purges the judiciary and the civil service of perceived enemies. I mean, he's willing to do anything. He has his stormtroopers and his secret police, his Gestapo eventually. And he is trying to create a racial state. He has these theories that Aryans, which he's not one, and most Germans aren't either, are racially superior to other groups, and he wants racial purity. So no mixing of the races. He doesn't like Jews. He doesn't like Poles. He doesn't like Slavic peoples, homosexuals, gypsies, Roma. There's all these groups that he doesn't like. And him and the Nazis will set forth a policy of eugenics. He's going to sterilize 30,000 Germans. He says basically that you don't have good enough blood, so we're not going to let you reproduce. You can't have a family. Abortions were illegal for healthy Germans. He wants good German citizens it's your duty to the Führer, the leader, which is his name, and to the German fatherland to have lots of good German children. But abortion is mandatory for the hereditary ill and racial aliens, groups that he doesn't like. And if you got, hereditary diseases, then, he wants you to abort your babies. He doesn't believe in handicapped people, mentally handicapped people taking up living space, Lebensraum, from good German people. His euthanasia program kills 200,000 people with physical or mental handicaps between 1939 and 1945, just staggering. And those are just precursors to the massacres of the Jews and Gypsies. Going to kill about 5.5 million Jews, and it's going to kill about 11 million total when it's all said and done, groups that he just didn't like. Anti-Semitism was influenced by the 19th century racism of the scramble for Africa. And in 1935, the Nuremberg laws defined Jews on racial basis. It prohibited marriage between Jews and non-Jews, so he makes that illegal. Jews are removed from government positions, civil service, and they are booted out of schools. He doesn't want them influencing good German children. And basically, they steal Jewish-owned businesses. And you get Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, which was a countrywide pogrom, against Jews on November 9th through 10th on 1938. Kristallnacht came because a young German boy, 19 years old, who's very angry that his father had been exiled from the country because he was a Jew, made the mistake of killing a German diplomat. And so the Nazis lashed out at German communities and destroyed over a lot of buildings and killed over 100 people in Kristallnacht, this night of broken glass. Okay. So what you see here is basically three main focuses. The first focus is uncertainty following World War I. The second focus is, the Great Depression. And then the third focus is the rise of dictatorships in Russia, Italy, and in Germany. All right, so you got Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini. This is our setup for World War II. All right, and all of this plays together. The terrible Treaty of Versailles sets the stage for World War II. The Great Depression helps set the stage for World War II, and the rise of these dictators is going to set the stage for World War II. Okay, guys, thanks for listening, and I will see you in class.